Hi folks, welcome back to Chaps Many Cultures, episode 143. And you know, when it comes to inclusion, this is something that's often we hear is provided later on in the organisations, in the corporate world. It's an important part of the work in having inclusion and diversity as a structure of the company. But maybe there's an opportunity for us to embed these ideas and these practices much earlier. And that's right, when we get the kids, get them early. And we're going to talk to somebody who does that intentionally and draws on her wonderful experience to provide that and encourage that. And we're going to talk to her today. Very honoured to have her. Stick around. Yes, welcome back to the show of the business of culture and the culture of business, where we give you the tips and tools, basically to be your very best self on the global stage. You know,
welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
Well, it's hump day. It's Wednesday. And did you just say that when I was younger, I was not inclusive? Is that what you were implying?
That's exactly what I was implying. I'm sorry. You've got it.
And you might be right about that too. So I learned about this later on in life. I wish I had known a little sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And that's in all seriousness. I wish I'd have known what I know today a lot earlier. Would have probably helped me a lot in my journey.
Well, I don't know. Was it Oscar Wilde or some other super smart British person who said, "Youth is wasted on the young people"? So it's if we had known about this when we were younger, we would have been much smarter teenagers.
Absolutely.
But we have somebody here today who does the inclusion work, or does instill the skills or the awareness of what it means to be inclusive and recognizing our beautiful bouquet of diversity that's around us, and harnessing the beauty of it and making the best of it and being more inclusive. We have somebody with us who does this for a living, and more so with a passion. Welcome to the Two Chaps Mini Cultures Studio Complex, Miss 𝙏𝙬𝙤 Lor. Welcome. Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
How are you, 𝙏𝙬?
I'm doing really well. How are the both of you?
Well, I'm always doing fantastic, and it's always good to see you. I mean, I have a selfish reason for bringing you on. I have the great pleasure of being in many workshops with, not many, but a few workshops with 𝙏𝙬. And you know, I can tell you the room lights up when she's there, and it lights up for many different reasons. Obviously, the personality, but also the presence of mind to be really aware and bring everybody together. And so, in all seriousness, thank you for the work you do, and I'm glad that you're able to now apply this today in your professional life. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm so grateful to be here and to, share anything that I could share, but really to just be in conversation. And I'm so glad to reconnect.
Excellent.
Right. Yeah.
Now let's try this not only with you, but also with everybody else who's watching. We want to know where in the world you're joining us from. So it's your prompt to do something. It's scrolling on the bottom of the screen, right? So I could ask you this, 𝙏𝙬, have you had breakfast, lunch, or dinner yet today? What was your last meal today?
I've had breakfast. So it is 10 a.m. in the morning Eastern time, and I am based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania currently.
There we go. Thank you very much. Pennsylvania. And I asked you this in the green room. I'm going to jump right in because I'm German. I'm super direct. I get a pass for this, right? Brett's already sweating bullets. Oh, what's he going to do now? So I know, because Brett told me, and we talked about this in the green room here, that you ethnically and culturally hail from the Hmong culture. And all I know, or I know very little about Hmong culture. I know a little bit, but not enough. But what I know about Hmong people who left Southeast Asia to live in the diaspora, many of them came to North America. And here in the United States, the center of Hmong life, so to say, tends to be the Twin Cities in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and you're not there. So what's up with that?
What's happening?
Yes, I know. I am kind of a rare one. Yeah, so Hmong people, the Hmong capital of the United States currently is in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, where my entire family is currently living there, actually. Nieces, nephews, like grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, everybody is in Minnesota. So yes, they also think I'm odd that I don't live there with them. And they're like, what are you doing in Pennsylvania? There's no Hmong food. There's no Hmong people. Like, how are you going to survive this? But
is there a Hmong version of a Philly cheesesteak yet? This is the important question.
Yeah, no, we're not there yet. There's
No,
not
we're
enough population. In the Twin Cities, there's like there's 2 Hmong villages. Like one is called Hmong Town and one is Hmong Village. You can go and just get any food. It's already pre-made. And whenever I'm home, I go right there. But there's a handful of Hmong people in Pennsylvania. They're a little scattered. They're not as concentrated as in the Twin Cities. So I found, a handful of Hmong folks here in Pennsylvania as well. But yeah, there's just not a huge concentration of them in one place. And in the Twin Cities, you see them everywhere. So yeah, home is in Minnesota, and you are right on to, assume like, why are you out here? So I'm out here for work, and I get to go home, during the holidays, or whenever I get a chance to go home.
Yeah.
So you said work, you're there for work. So tell the people, what is it you do? What is the work you're so passionate about?
Yeah, so I'm here. I'm the Associate Director of the Greenfield Intercultural Center at the University of Pennsylvania. And so I actually got my master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania in intercultural communication. And then somehow or another, that led me back here in Philly to UPenn, where I get to do this work with students to help them build inclusion and to build a communicative repertoire around inclusiveness and intercultural communication. How do you build dialogue? How do you facilitate it? How do you understand it for your own self and your own identity before you start extending it to other and getting to know other people and their cultural identities? So yeah, I work in higher ed, and in that realm, I get to study at the same time, like put it into practice in real time, the theories and practice of like intercultural communication. So that's what I do here in Philly.
So when these students come, so this is post-secondary education. So these are kids. I say kids. These are young adults in their
They're kids.
in their late teens and more likely early 20s, right?
Yep.
Do you find them entering post-secondary higher education as already well primed for an inclusive community lifestyle on campus, or do you find them, depending on wherever they come from to UPenn, that this is hitting them like a ton of bricks, and this is the first time they're being exposed to a level of diversity that they're not familiar with?
That's an excellent question. I think it's all of the above, because every student comes with a different walk of life, a different background. Some are more exposed than others. So I see a range of students, and here at Penn, but also at my previous institution, Wesleyan University in Connecticut, as well as my alma mater in Minnesota. Having seen a lot of students 18 to 22 who, come in either really woke, right? Like understanding who they are and their identities and bringing all of that diversity into the mix, or students who for the first time are like, I have never explored that part of myself, my cultural identity. Specifically, there's a story when I was in college. So I went to college near Fargo, actually, not as far up north, but in St. Cloud. And so an hour and a half north of the Twin Cities. And
bloody cold is what she's trying to tell you. Bloody cold.
It's cold. And also very white, right? Like literally and physically very white. And so for the first time, a lot of my classmates were like, wow, Kia, I've never had to think about my whiteness until I met you. Right. Because like for me, like I've always known I wasn't white. And so they were like, I've never had to think so deeply about my whiteness until I've met you. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting, because I think about my Asian identity all the time. I think about my Hmong identity all the time in context to whiteness. And so, there's students who come to college and they're like, for the first time, they're exploring these conversations. And then there's students like me and some of my peers and, classmates who have always recognized and understood where we stand in the spectrum of the social and cultural spaces, and having to always navigate that world, right? Those two worlds that make you kind of bicultural all the time, because you're always trying to navigate two cultures at the same time.
Were you perhaps mistaken in northern Minnesota, or the let's say the upper Midwest, rural areas in the upper Midwest? Were you maybe mistaken for Native American?
No, I was mostly mistaken as international student, more so than Native American. Although, that's an excellent point, because the more right now in a lot of my work at Penn, I work with a student group called Natives at Penn. A lot of our Native and Indigenous students really trying to, make themselves visible on campus and educate other people for their identities and better learn their own identities, because so much of it has been stripped away. So I work with the student group, and the more I learn about Native culture, I'm like, as a Hmong person, I identify more with the Native Indigenous people than I do with the Asian American community, just based on the fact that like Hmong people don't have a country. We're nomads, right? Like our country, we know how to adapt really well when we get to different parts of the world. The Hmong diaspora is all over the world after Southeast Asia, right? Like there's a handful of Hmong people in Australia, in France, in French Guiana, in the United States and Canada. And so, we're such an adaptive people at the same time, like, just very spiritual, very grounded. And that was really similar to a lot of the things that I'm learning about Native culture and, spirituality and shamanism and all of that. I'm like, I feel like I'm more Native than I am Asian American.
So the shared experience is that of being deprived of land that you can call your own, and being forced by your environment to adapt and adjust quickly. That's the common experience, right?
Yeah. And just kind of being, a people where we are the collateral damage of a lot of power hungry cultures and power hungry nations, right? The Hmong people coming from Southeast Asia, we lived in Southeast Asia for a very, very long time, up until the Vietnam War, where the Hmong people were, the United States somehow found the Hmong people with all of the colonization that the French had in Laos. And they found these hill people in the hills of Southeast Asia that they recruited to be a part of the war, to fight for democracy and to fight for American interests. And so Hmong people for a very long time lived in Southeast Asia, didn't even know how to drive cars, didn't have, things like currency. Everything was traded in stocks and in like livestock. And so when the Hmong people were recruited by the United States to be part of the secret war, the CIA secret war, as they call it, the Hmong people fought against communism. And part of the perk was that, you're being protected by the most powerful nation in the world, the United States.
That's why there's so many Hmong now living in the U.S. as their diaspora destination, so to say.
Yes.
For those people that are watching and thinking, Hmong, what is she talking about? Because this would have been me like 3-4 years ago. So would it be fair to say Hmong is a culture and a people that is their original habitat was in current day Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, a people that never had its own territorial integrity and was always basically a ping pong ball between those national identities, and before that the colonial powers. Would that be a fair description?
Yeah. Wow. Well put.
Okay, good.
Well put.
So when you talked about the search for identity, the first Hmong people that I met are also not from Minneapolis. They are from Minneapolis, but they have a family connection, but they live in the Carolinas. And I'm a lovely couple, young couple, 2 kids, and we met here in Atlanta, where I live, and we did some work together. And long story, but they slept over at our house for 2 nights, and because we're a hospitable family as well. And then they said, well, if we're going to stay here, we're going to cook. And I said, well, that sounds awesome. I'm in. But they didn't just cook. They went to the Asian supermarket in the boonies of Atlanta, and I don't know how much money they spent, but they bought the dishware, the silverware, they bought all the ingredients, and they cooked up a storm in my kitchen.
Wow.
And so I was the host. For me, it was like, am I not supposed to provide for you? No, you provided shelter for us, so let us provide food for you. And I had never experienced this in my whole life. And they explained to me how they, throughout their, they were both, no, well, she was born here in the US, but he was born in Thailand. And they explained to me how they were still struggling with what their identity is, because he says, I speak Thai, I speak Siamese, I also speak Hmong, but I see myself not as a countryless person. I see myself more as a Thai person, because that's where I was born and grew up. And for his wife, he was like, nah, I'm American, and yet I'm not really sure if I belong here yet. So is the search for identity amongst Hmong, is that a common narrative?
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends on who you ask. I think for me, I definitely identify more as American, right? Because that's where I spent the majority of my life. I was born in Thailand as well, in a refugee camp. But if people were to ask me if I identified as Thai, I can't say yes, because I don't know the culture. I don't know the language. I don't know the history in the same way that I know the US's culture and history, and is a part of that that's embedded into my own identity. But I would say, like, for people like my mom, who grew up in Laos and then spent a majority of her time in Thailand during the transition, the refugee camps, and then living the later parts of her life in the United States, there is a hunger for a homeland. There is a hunger for, going back to the homeland. For her, it's Laos. Even though, nationwide, or as a nation, we don't have a Hmong land, right? Or a Hmong country that we could call our own. A lot of people refer back to the Hmong land as China, Southwest China, before it was China, in a long time ago. And so that's kind of where the Hmong people would identify as the ancestral land. But, because we don't have a country of our own, at least politically, home is wherever you make that space for yourself. And for me, then, I have multiple homes. I have multiple spaces where I call, where I belong. And that's okay, that I don't have one place where I am this person or this nation, or that is the plot of land I go back to. I'm able to weave and navigate and adapt into different spaces quickly.
And this would be a great insight. And when we're talking with third culture kids, this is often we're explaining to them. We work with adults that grew up as third culture kids that don't even know they're third culture kids. And when we identify the type, we suggest that we're not explicitly saying this is how you feel. We're saying, do you feel this way? Do you feel this connection? And I found personally, working with third culture kids, that they do identify, obviously not with a country. They've got parents from different countries, but they identify with the idea of that shared identity from different countries. Find a community of people that they connect with that have that common experience. So I think do you find that drawing on that, on your experience growing up with that identity, that you find yourself, the students that work with you must find that fascinating, to be able to draw and learn from you how to navigate that? Because you said you're comfortable navigating it, but sometimes it's not comfortable. It's actually very discombobulating for people to have to navigate that. So in your support work, you find you're encouraging it in a very positive way? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I'm so grateful that I get to work with the 18 to 22-year-old students who are kind of at the phases of their adulthood where they're discovering all of that, right?
Yeah.
And so there are students where they are bicultural, right, or biracial, and they come into college and they want to explore one more than the other. Either their Black side, their white side, their Native side, whatever it is. There's college is the place to explore that. Those 4 years at a time where you really get to interrogate that part of your own identity. And I think me being somebody who has explored that, all of that, at the same time being somebody who, doesn't feel like, okay, this is the only identity I hold multiple identities, that helps students trust me. And that helps build a relationship with students in a way where I'm not so much this educator who like knows everything and I don't know everything. But, somebody who's more like a sister or a mentor who's like, hey, I don't have this figured out too, and let's figure it out together. Maybe I'm a little further along than you are, but let's figure this out together. So that helps me build a bridge with students in that sense. I think the other piece too is that I'm still young enough in my career where I'm not so far removed from the students' experience, from that 18 to 22-year-old experience, where students kind of see themselves mirrored in me. And so because of that, they come and they're like, hey, Kia, I'm really struggling with this piece of my identity. I'm really struggling with the privilege and the power dynamics that are at play, either if they are someone of privilege or somebody without privilege. Or they come to me and talk about a lot of family stuff, such as like, how do I tell my mom and my dad that like I don't want to be a doctor? I want to do this, or I want to do this, and what types of cultural conversations should I think about, should I have? And so having navigated that myself, it makes it really easy for me to help students make that transition and to have those conversations. At the same time, I think, the 18 to 22 age group, they are also really interested in getting to know other people and other cultures. It's the first time where they're exposed to so many different identities because they've left home, right? They don't no longer live in their parents' house or their hometown. And so this is a time where it is very, very important to have mentors and to have people at the institution who can really help them identify and explore those identities beyond the classroom.
You're on social media. We're connected with social media, and I really love watching your content in terms of, let's call it content, right? It is the way we put ourselves out in the world. In the conversations, and this is getting a little bit more personal to you, but in the conversations that you have with your mum and your family, given the fact you were born in a refugee camp, this is you've lived this life, and of course your mum has lived this life too. So in these conversations that you have with your family, immediate family, how deep do you get into this? And now you're kind of reverse engineering your knowledge and applying it to your family too. So is these conversations that are comfortable in the Hmong community, where they have these conversations openly and with you've got the advantage of having the intercultural knowledge, but maybe some people don't. So what is that you have with your family, and do you see it in the rest of the community?
Yeah. Oh, my mother. I love my mom so much. And then she is the person who has really forced me to expand the most too, because she's such a challenging character. I would say, my mom is one of my first intercultural mentors, whether or not she knew it, or whether or not she was doing it intentionally. But my mom is one of the biggest intercultural mentors I have had in my entire life. I think part of that is because she is an immigrant. She doesn't speak English. To this day, she still doesn't speak English. She doesn't drive. So she's very immobile in a country that requires all of us to have a vehicle in order, especially in Minnesota, where there's not a lot of public transit that's easily accessible. So my mom had a lot of cultural obstacles in her way in the United States. And as a child growing up with an immigrant parent, I always had to be that cultural broker all the time, whether or not it was economically, being the person who had to figure out all the finances, having to translate at conferences with my teachers to tell them, that, hey, this is what I'm doing at school. This is how my siblings are doing at school. And having to administer a lot of the dental appointments, a lot of her medical appointments, a lot of, things in life that like a young child is supposed to not do. But at a very young age, I had to be that cultural broker because my mom was not able to do it. And so I was really angry as a child, because I just wanted to be a kid. I wanted to go to school and be a child and not have to think about what to cook later on, or if my mom was, going to be out, that I had to be a part-time mom when my mom is absent. And so I remember being really resentful at my mom. And it took me to go study abroad in India and China to really understand her, because she would always say things like, Kia, the mountains are so beautiful in Southeast Asia. It is such a pity that you have to grow up in Minnesota. It's so flat, it's so cold. There's no waterfalls. Like in Southeast Asia, it's beautiful. You could drink the water off the stream. Or she would tell me things like, oh, you're so lucky also that you grew up in the US, where the roads don't have potholes, where there's laundry and there's drying that's like right in your house. I didn't understand these things as a child. And so it took me to go to India and China. I studied abroad both in India and China. I wanted to explore the world and expand my own cultural knowledge, right? And so I was in the Himalayas in India, and I finally realized what my mom meant by the beauty of Asia. And I did. I was like, wow, I this whole time I thought my mom was this idiot, this stupid person who like didn't have any cultural capital or like didn't understand things. And then here I was in this part of the world where I didn't understand anything, right? And I was new, and I brought jeans to India, and it was way too thick and too heavy, and it didn't dry because they didn't have a dryer. You have to hang everything. And so I'm like, wow, it's not that my mom is an idiot. It's just like she just doesn't know. She didn't grow up in this part of the world, nor, and how would she know? She came to the US in her late, 20s and had spent her whole young life in Asia. And so it took me to like leave home to really come to full understanding of who she was and to have empathy for her. And so I say all this to say my mom has been one of the biggest intercultural teachers in my life, to teach me empathy, to teach me compassion, to teach me that there are different realities. There are different versions of the world that are true. And that for me, in my own US-centric life, as even though I was a Hmong daughter and Hmong girl, and there were all these, rules about what it meant to be Hmong and all these identities that I carried as a Hmong daughter, there was also this like rebellious side, like where I just wanted to be American. And then I go abroad and people are like, you're not American. You don't look American. And I'm like, well, yeah, I am American. I hold an American passport. I remember specifically in China, they all just thought that I was the tour guide because I was the only Asian person in the entire study abroad group. So they just thought I was the tour guide and I was supposed to know the language. I did not know Chinese. I should have. If I was going to go to China, I should have learned some Chinese. But yeah, the assumption was just like, oh, okay, you're the Asian one, you're the translator, you're the tour guide, so we're going to talk to you. And there was this other guy, this white kid who like had 6 years of Chinese, was fluent, and like knew what was happening. And they weren't talking to him, they were talking to me, and I would be like,听不懂, like I don't know, I can't understand you. And they would, there would be a lot of cognitive dissonance for people because they're like, okay, you're not American because you're not white, but then you're definitely not Chinese because you don't speak Chinese and we don't claim you. And so what are you? So there's definitely a lot of those things that that I had to face abroad, that because of my mom and my relationship to my mom, that has really taught me to be more inclusive and to think about, how different people can have different identities and different belief systems. That helped me to kind of be more empathetic and understanding that, like, okay, yeah, like this person has never met somebody like me and they're confused, and it's okay. I just need to take a step back and educate them in any way that I know how. So yeah, so that's kind of my history and background with my mom and my family. But what's interesting is that now in the workforce, right, where I get to work in higher ed in spaces where, one, not a lot of people know but Hmong people, but two, there is all of this talk about inclusion and intercultural communication and how do you communicate across different communication styles. I have found that my biggest strength comes from my family and the way that, like, the collectivistic nature, and then my ability to operate in a very individualistic world, that these are strengths in the workforce that people are hiring for. That makes me a very good candidate in a lot of spaces where they're like, okay, we want somebody like that with those abilities, those skills, right? Where you could be polychronic and monochronic at the same time, where you understand high context and low context at the same time, and that these things can exist at the same time. So I get to to transfer a lot of those knowledge from my own family and my own culture into the educational space where I get paid for and I get paid to do.
As a child, you hated your mom because circumstance made you a cultural broker, even though you didn't want to. Now you're a cultural broker by intention. You're getting paid for it. Yes.
Yes.
And does your mum now say, how come you get paid for it and I didn't?
Oh, I wish my mom could get paid for it. You know, it's so funny. My mom doesn't know what I do for work.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah, she just knows I'm a teacher. That's all she knows. She's like, you teach at a university. So she doesn't know what I really do, nor does she care, honestly. She's like, as long as you get a paycheck and you're safe and you're well and you can pay off, you know, you could pay for rent. So she doesn't care what I do. And so it's interesting because I get to leave my associate director hat in Philly. When I go home, I'm just her daughter. I'm just, you know, I'm just Kia. And she just feeds me. And that's, you know, besides that, and she doesn't even know Philadelphia or Connecticut when I was working in Connecticut. So funny story, she would always tell my relatives that I worked in New York. Because I didn't work in New York. Because she can't pronounce Connecticut or Philadelphia or Pennsylvania. Like, these are really long words. And so New York is easy and it's iconic enough that she just tells my relative that I live in New York. And so whenever my relatives come out east, they're like, hey, can you give us a tour? And I'm like, I'm 2 hours out. I mean, I could meet up with you. I could give you recommendations.
Let me hop on a train real quick.
But everyone thinks I live in New York. And I'm like, because my mom doesn't understand like what I do for work or like what my life is like out here. She came to graduation to watch me walk across the stage in Philly. And so I think that was the only time that she's ever come out here. But yeah, besides that, she doesn't really know what I do for work. She just, you know, she's just like, Kia works in New York and she's a teacher.
You said something earlier that I want to come back to. You said that now students come to campus and they're already, and you used the word woke and you used it in air quotes. And I think that's the proper way of using that word, because I think it's taken on different interpretations of what it might or could mean. And I think to some extent we've experienced in the last couple of years a broad spectrum of wokeness or not wokeness, and some would say in certain pockets of our society we see a woke Olympics happening and people trying to outwoke each other. A phrase I'm borrowing from Aziz Ansari, who I heard him say it first. So if you get a chance, I know the man has his reputation got a little bit of a hit, and I don't know anything what went on there, but still watch Aziz Ansari's last stand-up thing on Netflix where he talks about how we try to outwoke each other and be so aware of all the identity differences that we encounter on a day-to-day, and yet we don't understand a thing. So do you find in your context, in a university campus context, that there are different camps, the woke camp and the part of the student population who rejects that kind of idea? Do you get pushback as well for your work?
Yes, excellent question. And yeah, I think especially within the last 4 years and the politics that's been happening in the US and just all sorts of spectrum. You know, the work that I do at the Greenfield Intercultural Center pulls from both. And I think it's important to pull from both, right? To still have a sense of social justice orientation to deal with all of the isms, you know, that's happening in our country. And then at the same time to give them tools instead of just like critiquing, criticizing, and always like trying to outwoke each other. We need to also give tools in terms of then what do you do when you are, you know, advocating for something that you are really passionate about, as you should, at the same time still have a dialogue and see, you know, maybe there's a different side or help people see something that they may not be seeing. And one of the approaches that I know I've taken with the Woke Olympics is, you know, is really thinking about our work in higher ed that's not just cutting, right? Because so much of higher education institution and even my peers and the work that I do, we give students not to cut and dice and cut things in pieces, to take things apart, to decolonize the mind, as we call it. We are really good as higher education people in academia to just give knowledge to students to cut, and to dissect every little thing about every little issue, whether or not it is about homophobia or, you know, Islamophobia, or against women, or, you know, against anti-Blackness, all sorts of stuff. Students are really good at criticizing and critiquing and dissecting a lot of these issues. But what we have failed in academia to do is to give them needles to thread, to sew. So much of the work that we have to do in the intercultural world and in the work that I want to do in this space is to give students, you know, they've done a good, you know, their teachers and their professors have done a really great job at giving them, you know, tools to critique and criticize and to cut. But I think in the cultural resource center spaces that are, you know, more student-centered, we need to be also then providing them needles and thread so that they know how to stitch, so that they can piece all of these things that they've, you know, cut, and put it back together in a way that makes sense for them and in a way that is meaningful for students. I know for me, for example, specifically in college, I was angry a lot and was one of these very woke social justice warriors who wanted to like dismantle the system that of oppression that white people had, that like all the superiority and like all the white privilege that I lacked as an Asian person, as a Hmong person, and as a low income, as a poor kid who like grew up in single parent and welfare. So I was really angry and really resentful, but that didn't get me places. That just made me really mad at the world. And it took me a little bit to take a step back and say, okay, how do I start threading this in a way that's, one, healing for me, but two, can really get the point across to my white colleagues and my white peers and my white friends, so that they too understand the oppression that I am feeling, that I'm going through. Same thing with men, right? Like just a lot of resentful as a young feminist in college, like just all anti-men and all of this. And then having to understand, how do I talk to men in a way that they get it, so that they understand why I feel this way, or like why I feel marginalized or oppressed. And so the work that I get to do in higher ed is really to help students find those needles and thread, those spaces of inclusion, those spaces where we can start sewing and start healing. So that we don't have to do this woke Olympic, you know, who is the smartest, who can, you know, has the biggest vocabulary around a certain whatever ism it is. That's great. We should, you know, students should have those vocabulary, and they should dissect. At the same time, then they need to learn how to put things together.
I love this metaphor, Kia. I really do.
Fantastic.
Sewing, stitching it together instead of cutting it up into into ever more small pieces and fragments. I love it. I haven't heard it put that way, and this really resonates with me.
We're stealing.
You know, because I think as a Hmong person, I sew a lot. Like I do a lot of needle arts, and I think that's just part of the Hmong story. Is for a long time we didn't have a written language, and so everything's passed down through words or through what most people call out. And so there's a thing called the Hmong story cloth. There's no like Hmong book or history, but there's this beautiful story cloth that tells a story, and it's all needle arts. About like the Hmong migration from China to Southeast Asia, to getting on the planes, to coming to the United States, and how the Mekong and the war killed a lot of people. And so as a young child, I sew a lot, like with needle and thread, and like needle arts is very much part of my DNA. And so for me, I think naturally in this field, why I'm so passionate about this field and why I like get to just be me in the work that I do, is that I get to bring all of these things that I'm like, oh wow, like people haven't thought about this, you know, like needle arts, and like how do we heal, how do we sew things together and make it, you know, beautiful, even though it's all fragmented. How do we sew things together?
Well, we're spinning a great yarn, and we have a common thread here. I love that we're going to build on this metaphor. I'm liking it. All right. Now, before we let you go, Kia, you need to introduce us to your studio setting, because I think you're the first You're the first guest on this program who is joining us from the Arboretum of the university campus, or I don't know, is it the Botanical Gardens of, um, where are we? This is lovely. I love this setting.
Yes, I thank you for asking. Yes, so this is my, my humble home, with all my plants. In quarantine, I have been just, working from home, and the only interactions I've really had is with my plants. And so these are all my friends. I am a plant mom. There is such a thing. And so they all have names, all my plants. So this is Manao, my lemon tree. This is Majesty, my Majesty palm. This is Joa, my dumb cane. I also have Peace over here. That's my Peace lily. And then a bunch more like behind me. And so, yeah, these are my friends. And today is Waterly Wednesday. So I will be watering them in a bit. But yeah, this is my little house with all my friends and my plants that I get to talk to every day and get to hang out with.
And fantastic.
Do they talk back, or would that be a step too far? I don't know.
No, they don't talk back, but they grow. They grow when you are good to. I think have you heard of this thing called like water has memory?
I heard of it. Yep.
Right, and that translates into so many other things. Like plants have memory, and like things have energy, and because of that, the energy that you give to it, they bloom and they grow. And so
I think they did studies once. I remember reading about this, that they did a lab experiment talking to the same type of plant with the same type of nutrition, talking to a plant in a derogatory, malicious way and in a supportive way, and the plant that was talked to in a positive way grew faster and blossomed, and the other one did.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you can do the studies with like apples, with bananas, with like anything, really. And it is true, the type of energy that we put out into the world breeds more of that energy. And then the more negativity that we bring into the world, then it breeds more negativity. So I hope that, I know that especially this past year with all the elections and stuff like that, a lot of people have, a lot of feelings about it. And I'm just trying my best to, breed in positive energy into the world through social media, through these types of conversations, through the work that I do with students. How can we water more of our students and make sure that they too are multiplying good, positive energy in the world?
Yeah, well, I can recommend anybody who wants to connect with 𝘾𝙗. It is a visual experience. You do a wonderful job of curating, but not just for the attention, right? It is a true experience to watch the way, again, as I said at the start of this episode, I've always been very honored to be in the same room as you, and I guess social media gives everybody the chance to do that for you. But you do bring a very different presence to your existence on this platform, and I think it's probably something we could all learn from. I mean, I'm the first to admit I fall into the negative side of it sometimes, and it's always great to stroll through and say, "Oh, there's 𝘾𝙗. I can pretty much say I know who put this post up as soon as I see the photo." It's wonderful. It is. You are a very special person, 𝘾𝙗. I mean that in all sincerity, and anybody who gets to be taught by you in New York is very fortunate. It's very great. Thank you so much. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, 𝘾𝙗.
Yes.
And here's a quick reminder before we all send you off into your day. Later on today at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, or at 7 p.m. in Central Europe, or at 10 a.m. over at the West Coast, join Brett and I on Clubhouse, the new cool kids app. You need to be on the phone and stuff. We don't know how to use it yet, but we'll figure it out today. So join us for a cultural town hall, or I don't know what we're calling it. We're gonna chat, right? And it's gonna be open. So if you feel like hopping in, we might actually give you a mic and you'll have to say something. And the good thing is, for those of you who are scared about being on camera, you won't have to even wear pants, so you can do it. You can sit on your throne if you want to. We don't care how you join us. So Clubhouse at 1 Eastern, 10 Pacific. And what else, Brett? What else do we need to remind people of tomorrow, right? We've got another episode coming up tomorrow.
We have tomorrow. We have another guest who will be talking about social media and using it effectively, and just building your brand and your voice, putting your voice out there, and building community, which is something we should do much more of. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Right.
Well, this concludes episode 140. What is it? Three. Remember, people, it is Water Me Wednesday. If you have potted plants in your vicinity, check the humidity level in the soil. You may have to add some water, and be nice to your plants. They'll reward you with growth. Kia, thank you very much for joining us today. And we're out for now. Two Chaps, Many Cultures. See you back tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.